Okay, I'll try it. Might not come out too good. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Yashodanandana Vajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tiravanachari Jamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vajajana Jamuna Tiravanachari Jamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Radha Giridhari ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gaura. Thank you. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudhirayat. Before reciting this Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, let us first offer our respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, to Narayan Rishi, the supremest human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and to Srila Vyasadeva, the author, and unto Srila Prabhupada. So, we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th Canto, 25th chapter, and second here, maybe this is the right place. Okay, no. I believe we are on 7 and 8, but let's see.
Verse 7, Prabhu.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so we're going to do 7 and then we'll also do 8, which has a purport. Let's see here now. Would you like to read the Sanskrit, Trivita Prabhu? Thank you.
Pretty formidable verse. Dhyayamanaha sorry. Dhyayamanaha surasuro ragasiddhagandhava vidyarana munigana anabadata madamudata vikrita vigbalalochana sulilita mukadikamitena pyayamanaha Saparshada Vibuddha Yutipatin Apadim Lana Raga Nabatullasika Moda Madvasavena Madhyan Modakana Vrata Modada Gita Shriyam Vaijayantim Swam Vanamalam Nilabasa Eka Kundalo Halaka Kudikuta Subhaga Sundara Pujo Bhagavan Mahindro Varanendra Iva Kanchanim Kaksham Udara Lilo Bibarti.
Thank you, Prabhu. That was very nice. So, translation. Shukadev Goswami continued. The demigods, the demons, the Uragas, serpentine demigods, the Siddhas, the Gandharvas, the Vidyadharas, and many highly elevated sages constantly offer prayers to the Lord. Because he is intoxicated, the Lord looks bewildered, and his eyes, appearing like flowers in full bloom, move to and fro. He pleases his personal associates, the heads of the demigods, by the sweet vibrations emanating from his mouth. Dressed in bluish garments and wearing a single earring, he holds a plow on his back with his two beautiful and well-constructed hands. Appearing as white as the heavenly King Indra, he wears a golden belt around his waist and a Vaijayanti garland of ever-fresh tulasi blossoms around his neck. Bees, intoxicated by the honey-like fragrance of the tulasi flowers, hum very sweetly around the garland, which thus becomes more and more beautiful. In this way, the Lord enjoys his very magnanimous pastimes. Do you mind doing the next one?
Ya esha eva manusruto dhyayamano mamukshunam anadikala karma vasana kutitam avidyamayam vidya grantim sattva-vajastamomayam antar-vidyam kata ashu nibinati tasyanubhavan bhagavan swayambhuvo naradaha sahatumburuna sabhayam brahmanaha sangshlokayamasa.
Thank you again. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. If persons who are very serious about being liberated from material life hear the glories of Anantadev from the mouth of a spiritual master in the chain of disciplic succession, and if they always meditate upon Sankarshan, the Lord enters the cores of their hearts, vanquishes all the dirty contamination of the material modes of nature, and cuts to pieces the hard knot within the heart, which has been tied tightly since time immemorial by the desire to dominate material nature through fruitive activities. Narada Muni, the son of Lord Brahma, always glorifies Anantadev in his father's assembly. There he sings blissful verses of his own composition, accompanied by his stringed instrument, or a celestial singer known as Tumburu. Purport. None of these descriptions of Lord Anantadev are imaginary. They are all transcendentally blissful and full of actual knowledge. However, unless one hears them directly from a bona fide spiritual master, in the line of disciplic succession, one cannot understand them. This knowledge is delivered to Narada by Lord Brahma, and the great saint Narada, along with his companion Tumburu, distributes it all over the universe. Sometimes the Supreme Personality of Godhead is described as Uttama Shloka, one who is praised by beautiful poetry. Narada composes various poems to glorify Lord Ananta, and therefore the word Sam Shlokayam, Asa, praised by selected poetry, is used in this verse. The Vaishnavas in the Gaudiya Sampradaya belong to the disciplic succession stemming from Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma is the spiritual master of Narada, Narada is the spiritual master of Vyasadeva, and Vyasadeva wrote the Srimad Bhagavatam as a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. Therefore, all devotees in the Gaudiya Sampradaya accept the activities of Lord Ananta related in the Srimad Bhagavatam as authentic, and they are thus benefited by going back home, back to Godhead. The contamination in the heart of a conditioned soul is like a huge accumulation of garbage created by the three modes of material nature, especially the modes of rajas, passion, and tamas, ignorance. This contamination becomes manifest in the form of lusty desires and greed for material possessions. As confirmed herein, unless one receives transcendental knowledge in disciplic succession, there is no question of his becoming purified of this contamination. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jananjanam Shalakaya Chakshurun Minatanyana Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Vanchakalpatarubhyscha Kripasindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So here in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is stressing that we need to hear from a bona fide spiritual master, and they are coming in parampara. Right? What we are up against, this is very amazing. I mean, in the 5th canto, we are hearing so much about the structure of the universe, all the different things that are going on in the universe, all the different levels of living entities, right? Like we understand there's 8,400,000 species of life in the material world, out of which 400,000 are in the kind of human category, which I believe includes all varieties of these kind of personalities, right? Devas, and they're all kind of, I believe, from what I've heard anyway, they're sort of in that category. So, so there's a lot of different options, right? I remember years ago, there's one lecture by Prabhupada, the devotees had titled, Heaven, Hell, Home, You Decide, right? So, and in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Yanta Deva Vrta Devran, Pitrin Yanti Pitrivataha Bhutani Yanti Bhutaja Yanti Mad Yajinopimam. If one worships the ghosts and spirits, if one worships the demigods, they'll go to those places. If one worships me, they'll live with me. So, we're getting a real tour, so to speak, of the universe and of all the different possibilities. And as soon as you are alive, right, this is the dynamic factor, like one of the expansions of Lord Balaram, I believe this form of Sankarshan, they're actually, the whole material universe is kind of coming from them, right? And then when he glances over material nature, right, Sa Ikshita, that glance personified as Lord Shiva, in which all of the conditioned souls are imbued, and they, again, the material creation gets going in another cycle of existence. And then all of these different variegated opportunities are there for us to experience life, to have all of the kama bijas, the seeds of fruitive activities from our previous lives in our heart, for those to fructify, for us to have different talents and different opulences, or the lack thereof according to our karma, and to be situated in some status of life that we wanted to be situated in. And then as we're living in that status of life, we are accumulating more karmic reactions. And these are like building up and building up. Like Srila Prabhupada has given this nice example here. The contamination in the heart of a conditioned soul is like a huge accumulation of garbage created by the three modes of material nature, especially the modes of rajas, passion, and tamas, ignorance. So, like this garbage pile in our heart, it keeps growing. I mean, that's the kind of sense we're getting here, right? We're accumulating this big pile of garbage, but it's not even static garbage. Like, okay, we can fill up the dumpster, right? And then the truck comes, once a week and, disturbs Bhagavatam class, and then they drive away, and then, the dumpster's empty again. So somehow it was relatively a simple process. Of course, don't go to the landfill, Sometimes they catch on fire from all the stuff that's like, smoldering and interacting there. But anyway, they get it out of our alley here, right? But that's, that type of garbage is generally just matter, right? So it's kind of static. It just, it fills up the thing, they take it away, they dump it, okay, it's done, right? But this kind of garbage that we're learning about here, this is very dynamic, because these are all these seeds, these kama bijas, these seeds of fruitive activities, and they're just going around with us from life to life to life, and they're, the super soul then reminds us of what we wanted to do, just like you see a child, right? They're very innocent, and they are. But it's because they're given that opportunity to grow up. But at a certain point of maturity, these kama bijas, they begin to fructify. And then this sort of starts to chart the unique path of a person in a given life, right? And then according to the karmic qualities of these kama bijas, we are again getting engaged in different types of activities, and some of these are generating more good karma, more bad karma, more mediocre karma. But the point is, this is just a big pile of contamination, because, like Krishnadas Kaviraj points out in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, we say this is auspicious and that is inauspicious. We say this is good and this is bad. But this is all manodharma. It's just the calculation of the mind, right? Because all of these things, whether relatively pious or impious or good or bad, I mean, we're not recommending impious activity, but from a higher way of looking at it, they're all keeping us here in this material world. And like Prabhupada points out in the Bhagavad Gita, that the modes of nature by which we are influenced are also very dynamic. They're never static, and they're always intermingling and intermixing. So even so, someone is trying to live a life, let's just say, in the mode of goodness, but the mode of passion is coming, the mode of ignorance is coming, and we're getting pulled this way and that way, and we're engaging in activities, right? So it's not easy, right? That's why the point is being made here, that unless and until one takes shelter of a bona fide spiritual master coming in disciplic succession, that one will not be able to cut this knot of material existence. One won't be able to get rid of this big pile of garbage, this huge accumulation of garbage in our heart. Lord Brahma actually explains this beautifully in the Brahma Samhita. He says, everybody who walks in the path of work from the great Indra in heaven all the way down to the Indragopa germ, and from what I've heard, these Indragopa germs are like, they have a very short duration of life. They're very tiny, like sometimes Prabhupada would talk about, and you notice it in tropical country. You don't see it in San Diego so much because it's so dry, there's not as much life. But, go down to India, go to the Caribbean or somewhere, and you see that example, like there's a light and so many bugs are attracted. In the morning there's a pile of dead bugs, because their lifespan is such. They're born, they fly to the light, they hang around for a little while, and their life is over by morning sometimes, right? So Indragopa is probably even smaller than that. So he's explaining that everyone who's walking in this path of fruitive activities in this world, who's accumulating all this garbage in the core of their heart, they're all trapped because nothing they can do, there's nothing they can do. Like we were hearing the other day about prayaschita, right? I think Balaram was explaining. And like the whole problem with prayaschita is that it's not solving the problem. Like you're unloading one reaction, but you're not changing the mentality and the consciousness which causes one to engage again and again, like the example of the elephant taking a nice bath and then rolling on the mud, right? So Lord Brahma explains that only bhakti, only devotional service has the effect of not only freeing us from the karma phala, from the karmic reactions that we are living in the midst of right now, but it actually burns all the way down to these kama bijas, to these seeds, which are what motivates us in the given lifetime to get with the program, and get into enjoying your material body and seeing everything around us as an opportunity for enjoyment, right? So only devotional service has that potency. No other spiritual path, nothing. Devotional service is so powerful that it not only frees us from the karmic reaction, but it completely destroys the seed of fruitive activities, right? So this point is being made here. And that devotional service, that opportunity of devotional service, it's coming to us by the grace of a bona fide spiritual master. And when we hear about Lord Ananta, about Lord Shankoshan from a bona fide spiritual master, then the effect, the purificatory effect that Lord Shankoshan can have going into our heart, when we bring him into our heart, when he's coming in through our ears in the narrations of the bona fide spiritual master, and our heart, we can actually receive the Lord in our heart by their grace, the purification. Rishikena Sevanam Bhakti Ruchite, the spiritual master is practically engaging us in ways that our mind is becoming purified, our senses are becoming purified, and ultimately our heart is becoming purified. And then the Lord can work his magic in our heart. Right? When Krishna Surya Sam Mayahaya Antakaryahan Krishna Nahan Nahi Mayar Adhikar, that when the Krishna sun arises in the heart, all of that contamination, all of this piles and piles of garbage that we've been, holding on to for so long, our little cherished anartas, right? When the Krishna sun appears in the heart, all of that is just dissipated, right? Krishna's pavitram utramam. Sometimes Prabhupada gives the example. It's like the sun. Somebody goes, there's a guy who sleeps on the step right next door. I see him when I come from Mangalarti. And he smokes a million cigarettes and he does this and that, but in the morning, sweeper comes and sweeps the cigarette butts, and the sun comes, and within a day or two, it's all purified. Even somebody's passing urine, right? Give a day or two of sunshine, you wouldn't even know it, right? So in the same way, there's a nice verse in the Gita, right? That when, however, one is enlightened with the knowledge by which the nescience is destroyed, then such knowledge reveals everything as the sun lights up everything in the daytime, right? And in that purport, Prabhupada also talks about this principle of the Krishna sun. When this knowledge of Krishna is given to the disciple by the spiritual master, then these things can happen. But we have to hear from a bona fide spiritual master, right? So, and it's actually very, very important, because we see that Maya, the illusory energy of the Lord, because we need to be tested, all these things. So she's always covering, right? Like sometimes there'll be an explosion of Krishna consciousness. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in his most merciful, most magnanimous form, appeared on earth with all of his Parshada, Nityasiddha associates and other incarnations. Mahavishnu was here, right? Lord Balaram was here, everybody was here. Such an amazing profuse, unlimited distribution of love of God, right? But within a few hundred years, right, it was a mess, right? I mean, the average person looked at Gaudiya Vaishnavism and thought, oh, it's a bunch of beggars, or it's a bunch of perverts, or, there were people that were saying they were representing Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and they were like sleeping with 10 people's wives and this and that, and having their own rasa dances, or so many misunderstandings, so many apasampradayas sprung up. So personalities, bona fide spiritual masters like Bhaktivinoda Thakur just had to start pushing back. He read Chaitanya Charitamrita and he's like, wait a second, this is completely bogus. You know what I mean? And we have to actually get this real process reinstated so that the people can be benefited, right? So this is bona fide spiritual masters, right? It's so important, this actual basis. I mean, why did Prabhupada call his Bhagavad Gita as it is? We were discussing the other day. Because in the introduction, he says a lady asked him to recommend a English version of the Bhagavad Gita, and he said, in all honesty, I couldn't do that, because in almost every version that was existing at that time, the commentators had just used the Gita as a vehicle to present their own ideas, whatever they were. The Gita is a very famous book. So, okay, Swami Snatchananda, Rupi or whatever, I'll give my, my commentary, and it's totally, coming out of somewhere, their head. So anyway, Srila Prabhupada therefore gave Bhagavad Gita as it is. Rupa Goswami, right, gave us this verse, Shruti Shmriti Puranadi Pancharatra Vidhimbina Aikantiki Hare Bhaktir Upadaya Vikalpate, that devotional service of the Lord that ignores the authorized Vedic literatures, the Shrutis, the Shmritis, the Puranas, Mahabharata, Ramayana, Bhagavad Gita, is simply an unnecessary disturbance in society. Because that kind of so-called devotional service, which is actually deviating a soul who comes and tries to become Krishna conscious, that is not going to move this mountain of garbage in the heart, right? It may even add a few more flavors, you know. What was that ice cream bar? 31 flavors, right? So we have this mountain of garbage, right? And that has to be cleared, but the only force that can clear this mountain of garbage, the only force that has the power, the potency in this age of Kali is pure devotional service, right? That's why you have this whole interlude at the beginning of the Bhagavatam when Vyasadeva, after giving all the Vedic literatures, dividing the Vedas, expounding it, the Upanishads, the Puranas, right? And he's feeling unsatisfied that I really haven't done enough and I'm feeling disturbed. And he's introspectively trying to analyze what's wrong. And he starts to get a hint of what it is, that he hasn't directly glorified the Lord enough. And then, at exactly the right moment, his spiritual master shows up at his ashram, Sri Narada Muni, and immediately they have a conversation, and he diagnoses the problem fully, that yes, you haven't directly glorified. You've given so many prescriptions for gradual advancement, which is good in most ages, right? Because people, we come here to enjoy, so you give processes that guide us so that while we're enjoying, we're gradually getting steered towards Krishna through the Vedic culture, through the rituals, through the, the principle of beginning to serve, perform yajna, all these things, right? Except that there's a higher power like that. So that's all good. But Narada Muni is pointing out that in the age of Kali, none of this has the potency to do the job that's required, and only this Krishna Katha, right? This hearing about Krishna from the lips of a bona fide spiritual master, only this ultimately has the potency to actually do the job that is required to move this mountain of garbage in our heart. So anyway, that's a really important point that's being made here. And I thought, we could look at this a little bit because, like sort of a case study type thing, this principle. So I was kind of remembering, one of the great pure devotees who had heard directly from Lord Sankarshan is King Chitraketu, right? And we all know the story, but it's very instructive in terms of the points that Srila Prabhupada is bringing up here. King Chitraketu, as we know, was a great, great king, right? And he had a huge empire, and he had, was it millions of wives or thousands of wives? Huge, huge. And he had so many wives because 10 million, thank you. Thank you. So, one of the reasons the kings have a lot of wives, usually not that many, but they need to have progeny. They need to have a son, at least one, ideally a whole bunch, because when you're fighting wars and kshatriyas and all that stuff, sometimes you lose a few. So, they're always trying to, that's part of their duty, right? So anyway, he really wanted a son. So, and he was a pious guy. So at some point, Narada and Angira Muni, in the course of their travels, they came there, and of course he received them nicely, but being who they are, Trikalagya, and they can see into the hearts of anyone, they could understand that this king, we can say so many things, but his desire to have a son is just eclipsing everything else in his heart. Like sometimes someone might be talking to us, but we have something that's really on our mind, you know what I mean? And we're just waiting for our chance to say it, and like nothing they can say is really going to go in that deep because we're just focused, or vice versa, right? So they could kind of see that this king, somehow this desire has to be fulfilled for him, right? But being very expert, right? There's a nice place where the Lord explains that sometimes somebody wants to be my devotee, but they're holding on to material desires, right? Like every morning we're saying the 10th offense, right? To not have complete faith in the holy, in chanting of the holy name, and to maintain material attachments even after understanding so many instructions on this matter, right? So we have to give up these material attachments. But sometimes these attachments are so great that the Lord will indulge it, right? Oh, okay, this person can't get over this so easily. I'll fulfill it. He wants to be my devotee, but he's asking for this and he's asking for that. Okay, he's a fool. He could have devotional service, but he wants this other, very piddly stuff, right? So he says, but I'm not a fool. So I will fulfill his material desire, but I'll do it in a way where he'll never ask again, right? Right. So in the same way, Narada Muni and Angira, they saw that this King Chitraketu has a lot of potential, but he's just got this desire that he has to work out. So they said, he was able to ask for benediction, and the benediction he wanted was, please, I just can't have a son. I really need a son. I have all the, wives. So they said, okay, well, we'll give you a son. But they mentioned he'll be Harshashoka, right? So bring you happiness and sadness, right? But at that point, the king was so elated that he's finally getting a son by the grace of these great rishis. It's going to work out. And people think, okay, well, probably when he's a teenager, he's going to be a trip, and, it's going to cause me some pain, but at least I got a son, and we'll train him up right, and he'll grow up and take over the empire, and everything will be good, right? So he kind of glossed over that part. He didn't really fully pick up on the implications. And then they're always traveling, the great celestial sannyasis, always traveling, like we're reading here. Narada Muni's traveling, and also with his companion Tumboru, constantly broadcasting the glories of the Lord. They don't stay one place too long. So this arrangement was made, and he got the son. Of course, we all know what happened, because of so many wives. And then he and his wife who had the son became so focused on the son, and to the exclusion of all the other wives, they became envious. They poisoned the son. He died, right? So then this lamentation, right? The lamentation starts, right? So, and actually they were crying so loud, it was like, you could hear it all over the universe practically, So then, very merciful sages, Narada and Angira, come back, right? So they come back, and it's this scene of like devastating lamentation, right? So, they see the situation, and they, understand the situation, and they're trying to, console the king. And so, they say, what do you want? My son's okay. Well, let's bring him back. Let's see what he has to say to you. So you want us to do that? Yeah. So then they bring the boy back, but the boy now he's freed from this material body, and just like sometimes we read when the baby's in the womb, right? They're just a little baby in the womb, but at around 7 months, they become completely conscious of their suffering situation, and in that state of consciousness, they're offering all these beautiful prayers to the Lord and begging the Lord that, please, when I come out this time, don't let me forget you, let me become engaged in devotional service. So the living entity, although we become covered by the modes in different ways, that knowledge is always there within the living entity that can be brought out, right? So he came back kind of in his subtle form, and he, began to, they said, here's your parents, they're very disturbed that you died, all these things. And he says, oh, which parents are those again? I've had so many. So he just begins to speak spiritual knowledge, and hearing from this son that they just went through so much emotional upheaval over, they could take it, right? Even the sages understood. We can't give it to this person right now, but they could hear it from the son. And he gave them that spiritual knowledge. And from that knowledge, then King Chitraketu was able to move on, and he was able to begin to actually hear from the spiritual masters, and he became the disciple of Narada Muni. And Narada Muni actually instructed him very, very nicely, and he gave him this mantra. It's what's it called? Something Mahavidya, and a beautiful series of prayers glorifying the Supreme Lord that he should chant regularly. And now he's passed through all these other situations in life where he's just focusing on devotional service. Now he's engaging in devotional service on the order of a bona fide spiritual master, and he's taken it as seriously as anyone could take it. He's chanting this mantra, he's following, he's actually fasting. So, he, kind of like Dhruva Maharaj or someone, he just took it so seriously that within a week, he became completely pure devotee. He was installed as the king of Vidyadhara, which is interesting, Vidyadhara Loka, because it's mentioned in the first verse that some of the personalities who are routinely glorifying Lord Sankarshan are the Vidyadharas, right? So he was installed as the king of the Vidyadharas, and then he actually had the darshan of Lord Sankarshan. So he was able to come there, and by the grace of his spiritual master, by the grace of his sincere practice of bhakti yoga, chanting the mantras his guru gave him, and within a week he was able to actually have the darshan of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So these things are possible, right? This process we're following, according to how seriously we apply it, right? So he applied it very, very seriously. So he came and he bowed down, and Lord Sankarshan was there, the four Kumaras were there, so many exalted personalities were there, and he offered many, many beautiful prayers to Lord Sankarshan, glorifying him, and then Lord Sankarshan instructed him, right? So, this is a case study and a success story about this, main point that Prabhupada's making here, is that one has to surrender to, hear from, and receive Krishna conscious instruction from a bona fide spiritual master, right? And if one does this, one will become Krishna conscious, the mountain of garbage in the heart will be removed, and by the grace of Guru, one will be able to see and serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face, right? So this is really, what is being presented in this process of Krishna consciousness, right? And the conversation they had was amazing. And, one interesting point too is that we understand, like when we were reading about Lord Balaram on his appearance day, he's the original spiritual master, right? So Lord Sankarshan, his expansion, Lord Anantadev, Prabhupada's using these words kind of interchangeably in this section. So they are also the original spiritual master, right? So we kind of see that, there is this cooperative arrangement going on. Like sometimes it's said that by the grace of Krishna in the heart, Lord Paramatma, one gets Guru. And by the grace of Guru, one gets Krishna. Because, just like the famous picture in the Bhagavad Gita of the two birds in the tree, right? Sometimes the book distributors will use this to try to explain to people, right, what is the actual situation. Like we're the bird who's trying to enjoy all these sweet and bitter fruits, and we're enjoying and suffering accordingly. And the other bird is his friend, he's witnessing, and he's waiting for that bird to turn to him and ask for, a better plan, right? So in the same way, when the living entity becomes satiated or just frustrated or whatever, gets to the point of not being content and begins to ask those, who am I, why am I here, what is life's meaning, kinds of questions. When one comes to that point, then immediately the other bird, the super soul, Krishna in the heart, that's just what he's been waiting for. He's been accompanying us in our material sojourn for anadi. You can't even figure out where the beginning was, right? And he's just kindly accompanying us. He's fulfilling all of our desires. We don't have the potency to manifest any of this stuff. He's fulfilling all of our desires. Man proposes and God disposes, right? He's reciprocating as a kind father according to how we approach him, right? All of them as they surrender unto me, I reward accordingly. So as long as we're asking Krishna for chump change, he's given it. He's fulfilling all of our little material desires so we can go on in this material world and just keep bouncing around from life to life, right? But his whole purpose of being with us is his inner purpose. What he wants to happen is he wants us to turn towards him and begin to renovate our relationship with him so that we can really be happy, right? So when one comes to that point, the super soul within makes an arrangement where we become in touch with a bona fide spiritual master. And that bona fide spiritual master then trains us in such a way that we are able ultimately to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, again, as we are intended to do, right? So this is a very amazing process, and it's seen that there's a nice story actually that kind of illustrates this point a bit. It's in the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, and I mean, every devotee has some story like this. I remember years ago, that little room at the end where you keep your shoes now, I think, in the ashram. Well, that used to be the classroom for the Bhakti program, so it was pretty... I think we had some shoe racks outside on the ledge. But anyway, that room was pretty suchi because we had classes there every day. And then on Sundays, because the Bhakti program and other devotees too, one of our duties was to serve out the Sunday feast to all the guests. So the idea was feed them first so that, A, we're not envious of and B, we have the strength, and, C, by the time the feast is all served out, you don't get a bunch of new bhaktas going back and saying, hey, it's all gone. I'm jumping ship, right? So anyway, we'd feed everybody nicely up there first. And His Holiness Bhadnaran Maharaj used to like to come up and take prasadam with us. And he had this habit. He would kind of get devotees to tell their backstory, how they came to Krishna consciousness, right? And it was always fascinating. And generally speaking, you always found some element of a spiritual search, generally. I mean, most of the time. It usually wasn't like, well, I was just enjoying life and everything was totally great, but then I decided to become a Hare Krishna, I mean, sometimes that was there, but usually there was some, things that brought people to a point in life, where they began a spiritual search, whether it was through knowledge or, Krishna says different types of people begin to render devotional service. But anyway, the stories always had an element that was very inspiring, that somebody actually really began to sincerely want to find a higher life, and then Krishna made some arrangement where they came in touch with the devotees and everything went from there. So there's a nice story in the Lilamrita. There was a devotee, he actually became Srila Prabhupada's personal servant for quite an extended period, named Upendra Prabhu. And this is in the second temple had just been started in Haight-Ashbury, 1967. And so he was a young man, he was out, summer of love, and went out to Haight-Ashbury and he was digging on the scene. And there was so much interest at that time in Indian spirituality, right? Krishna was engineering things in a way, Srila Prabhupada's ardent desire to deliver us, right? So anyway, so he was walking down the street and he was becoming acquainted with, Indian spiritual thought. And he was just thinking, I need to progress. I need to find a guru. That's what he was thinking, right? And I need to find a guru who can actually teach me this, spiritual life. And then as he was walking, he had boots on, and there was, San Francisco, there's hills and there's wind, right? A lot of wind. So there was looked like a piece of trash, piece of paper blowing down the thing, and it stuck on his boot. And he kicked it, wouldn't quite get off. He kicked it a few times, just like flick your leg, right? So after it was stuck on his boot, he finally had to reach his hand down, and as he picked it up, it was an invitation to the second Hare Krishna temple at Frederick Street, I believe, right? In Haight-Ashbury, advertising, classes on Bhagavad Gita. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, a Bonafide guru, was teaching, said something to that effect, and it was like, there it was, So he marched on down to the temple the next night when the program was going, and very, very short time was personally serving Srila Prabhupada, right? So just one example, but by the grace of the Lord within, one comes in contact with the bona fide spiritual master. And that bona fide spiritual master then trains the disciple in such a way that they actually come to the shelter of the Supreme Lord, just like Maharaj Chitraketu, right? So that's what we're all being trained by our spiritual masters in this same process. I'm just going to jump in here for a second and then I'll end. But there was this, when I was reading about the conversation with King Chitraketu and Lord Shankarshan, there was a really interesting, I wanted to read a lot, but the time went faster. And so I'm just going to read this one verse anyway. They're having this nice conversation, and now the Lord is speaking to him. Let me go back to these. And just, a little bit of blissful information. So this is Lord Shankarshan speaking, and he's explaining, all living entities, moving and non-moving, are my expansions and are separate from me. I am the supersoul of all living beings who exist because I manifest them. I am the form of the transcendental vibrations like Omkara and Hare Krishna, Hare Rama. and I am the Supreme Absolute Truth. These two forms of mine, namely the transcendental sound and the eternally blissful spiritual form of the deity, are my eternal forms. They are not material. So anyway, that was one of his instructions, which I thought was very, very sweet, because these two forms of his, specifically, the holy names of Krishna, the transcendental sound vibration, Shabda Brahman, right? And the eternally blissful spiritual form of the deity, right? So this is the Bhagavat Vidhi and the Pancharatrik Vidhi. And these are the processes on which our entire spiritual life progresses, right? I believe it was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, is that correct? Srila Prabhupada quoted. He gave the example, very appropriate in that period in India especially, even now, that Pancharatrik Vidhi and Bhagavat Vidhi are like the two tracks of a train, right? You go to India, and if you're going on a dime, you take a lot of trains, right? And the trains are like, the whole, Srila Prabhupada started the GBC because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wanted the GBC as the managerial authority. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta coined the acronym GBC because the best run thing in the entire subcontinent of India was the railroad. And the railroad was managed by a governing body commission. So he thought, okay, we want the best management structure for our Gaudiya Math. And when they didn't get it together after he left, Srila Prabhupada said, I'm going to start a GBC right away because this is the management structure that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wanted, right? So anyhow, this example was given that the Pancharatrik Vidhi, engaging in the service of the deity, engaging one's mind, one's senses, one's hand, right? Engaging cooking for, cleaning for, decorating, dressing, absorbing one's mind, one's feet in walking to the temple. All of these processes of the Pancharatrik Vidhi system are specifically given to enable us to purify ourselves even in this life. Just like the example of the iron rod, right? When the iron rod is continually placed in the fire, it becomes like fire and attains the qualities of fire. Similarly, even with this material body, material mind, etc., if we are continually engaging it in loving devotional service to Shri Shri Radha Giridhari, Lord Jagannath Baladev Subhadra, Shri Shri Gaurnathai, the spiritual master, right, on the guidance of the spiritual master. And if we're doing so with full knowledge and full enthusiasm, that's the Bhagavat Vidhi, right? You can't just have one or the other, I mean, you technically could just have the one, the Bhagavat Vidhi, but are we on that platform, right? Generally not, right? It is, yes, you can say someone can just sit down and chant Hare Krishna. Haridas Thakur was doing that, right? But generally, we need these practical activities of purification of the Pancharatrik Vidhi for 99.99999% of people, right? So these two processes that example was given, they're like the rails of the train on which the train can smoothly, steadily progress to its destination, which in this case is back home, back to Godhead, right? So, this is, I just thought it was nice to read how Lord Ananta, Lord Chankrashan, is actually explaining, that he is, sorry, it's over here. I am the form of the transcendental vibrations like Omkara and Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, and I am the Supreme Absolute Truth. These two forms of mine, namely the transcendental sound and the eternally blissful spiritual form of the deity, are my eternal forms. They are not material. So the original spiritual master, in other words, is manifesting what is required for all of the spiritual masters to engage their disciples so that they can actually become pure devotees and go back home, back to Godhead. So, this is such a scientific process, and it goes all the way to the top. You know what I mean? The Supreme Lord himself is making the arrangements to make these paramparas actually work the way they're intended to, right? The Supreme Lord is so invested in what we're doing right here, right now, because he knows what works, right? And his representatives know what work. And, that's why this works so well. So I'll end there for the time. Any questions or comments, corrections? Tyler Prabhu.
Yeah, I had a kind of a concept that I was hoping we could maybe explore a little bit. It was based off something Balaram had shared
Yeah.
a while ago. We were talking about purification. He was on the Vyasasana. He was talking about going to the Bay Area with Tirtha Maharaj. And just by associating with him and doing activities, he said he felt some purification.
Mm.
And so I'm trying to think about purification. It's it's on austerity, right? Like tapasya. That's purification, right? Austerity and tapasya. Purification is difficult, isn't it? I think that's what I'm trying to get is we're doing this thing that ultimately leads to bliss. But purification itself, at least the general public, they don't want to do that naturally. And it's hard to do. We're talking about fasting and waking up early and following rules and regulations and doing the positive aspects of our sadhana, which takes a lot of time and effort to read and chant. And these things are purifying us. Does he come to a point where that purification itself is blissful, or is it that we're bliss and we need to experience purification to experience ourselves as bliss? It's like the blockade that needs to be removed. How can we make purification blissful? Why do we always talk about the importance of purification? When does purification lead to bliss? And does purification ultimately end and then you're just in bliss? So I wanted to really try to talk about purification.
This is really the movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That is really what you were just bringing up, very important points. That's really what they have addressed, because generally speaking, we do associate purification with intense tapasya, right? I mean, like you hear about the yogis and the mystics, and their lifestyle is one of purification, and it's one of intense tapasya. I mean, even the beginning of the universe, right? The very first cognitive being, Lord Brahma, what's the first thing he heard? He was trying to figure out what's the purpose, right? So everything is based on that. And even like we read in the Bhagavatam and the Vedic literatures, everybody was aware of that. Like even the demons, if they wanted to get ahead, right? If you want to take over the universe, well, if Hiranyakashipu can perform better tapasya than Indra, he can take over the universe, right? Because from that tapasya, we're looking for purification, but you can also get power. You can become incredibly powerful, right? Dhruva Maharaj's tapasya was so great, it got to the point was the whole universe was like, the whole universal airs became part of his breathing, and because he wasn't breathing very fast in yogic trance, it started to get kind of problematic to where the devas had to go to Brahma and say, "What's going on? It's like all the air's being sucked out." He was, "Oh yeah, well, Dhruva's doing pranayam, and like, what do we do?" So, this is the power of tapasya. But Kalar dosha nidhe rajan asti yeko mahan gunaha kirtanareva krishnasya mukta sangha. But then the age of Kali comes, and it's a great ocean of faults, right? So we don't have this type of determination to perform that type of tapasya. We don't have this kind of concentration, right? I think I heard it some classes ago, but what is the average American's concentration span now considered to be? Was it 6 seconds? Yeah, 6, 7, 8 seconds. Concentration span. Somebody mentioned it the other day in class, statistically, you know what I mean? And then you look at these yogic sages, right? I mean, they're sitting in one spot, concentrating, one-pointedly, sometimes for, years, eons, right? Right, so Kali Yuga is a problem, you know what I mean? Like, there's that famous story of the sage that had the benediction that he was going to live till, he was really hairy, and he was going to live till all his hairs fell off, and like one hair would fall off every kalpa or something. And it's just somebody went by and said, "Hey, you're just sitting out here, the elements. Why don't you build a house?" He goes, "Oh, I'm just here temporarily, So, like these types of personalities, right? They had these abilities, right? Is it Satya Yuga that the process they would meditate for 60,000 years to attain perfection? I mean, totally focused and rapt meditation, rapture. You know what I mean? So so it's a great ocean of faults. Therefore, Lord Chaitanya and the Panchatattva come, and they do something really amazing. They give this process, which is simultaneously the easiest and the most sublime, spiritually fulfilling process, and it's Kevalananda Khan. It's joyfully performed, right? So not only, tapasya is there. You mentioned we get up early. We get up earlier than most people. and we're encouraged to take a cool bath in the morning, and like we don't eat meat, fish, or eggs, right? We don't have illicit sex. We don't gamble, right?
We don't eat till midnight.
Yeah, tomorrow we don't eat till midnight. So there is some tapasya, right? But it's very minimal. And, like, okay, so we fast till midnight, and then we have this amazing kirtan and this amazing feast, and the next day we have the best feast of the year. Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja is offered to him, with so much loving devotion. So, it's a very jolly process. And this is an amazing thing because, yes, we're performing some tapasya, and there's purification coming from that tapasya, but purification is also coming from chanting and dancing, singing the names of the Lord, honoring prasadam, right? Kirtan yoga, right? Like we say honoring prasadam because it's not just eating food. Like we're not encouraged to be that austere because one of our big processes of purification is honoring prasadam. Prasadam is completely spiritual remnants of the deity. And by honoring prasadam, we are actually hugely purifying ourselves by chanting and dancing in kirtan, right? One time, what Prabhupada said, when you clap your hands in kirtan, all the birds of sinful desires fly away, right? So, nectar devotion, thank you. So, like so many of our processes are so proactive, right? Like it's so proactive. Like the things that we are doing that produce purification, I mean, the tapasya is there, and the tapasya has to be there, and it's a very important point because, sometimes, in other words, one time was it Allen Ginsberg, I think he, not exactly, I don't know if accused is the right word, but he, mentioned to Srila Prabhupada that, he thought he was too conservative, and Prabhupada was like, shocked, you know what I mean? Like, me, conservative, you have no idea how liberal I am. Like, Prabhupada, he's actually come to the West and he's just opened all these doors where very ordinary people like me can begin this process of devotional service. And he's written his purports in such a way that anybody, anywhere, in any language can assimilate it and very, very quickly become absorbed in Bhakti Yoga, right? And so many, the austerity is important because if we are not following the austerities of Krishna consciousness and we're trying to practice the proactive, positive aspects of Krishna consciousness, it's kind of like you're filling up a glass with nectar, but you have installed a big hole in the bottom of the glass, right? So, we won't be able to reach the desired destination that way, right? You're pumping air into a tire, and with the other hand, you're cutting a hole in the tire, right, on the other end. So, those austerities have to be there. If we want to ultimately see the beautiful forms of Radha and Krishna, we have to give up desiring to be the enjoyer in sex life and material enjoyment like that. So the austerities are there, but they've made it in such a way that it's so pleasing and so joyful. I mean, think about it. Who else is singing and dancing at 4:30 in the morning? I mean, even the club guys they're already staggered out of there by 3:30. You know what I mean? And by that time they're so puking in the bush, right? Stumbling down the street. So who else is dancing at 4:30 in the morning with jubilant smiles and happy and encouraging each other to jump and chant the names of Krishna with full abandon, right? Who else gets to do that? Who else gets to eat feasts of Krishna prasadam, right? Who gets to do that? I mean, like the kings and queens and the executive heads of the countries, they don't get to honor prasadam, you know what I mean? Like devotees, there's just nothing like it, So the process is easily and it's joyfully performed. So hope it didn't go too long. Anything else?
I had a few things that came to mind when you were speaking, but one, and I could be wrong about this, but I think it was Kaushalya. It might have been Govinda Mataji, but I think Kaushalya Mataji said that she, like Upendra, I think she said that she was in Hawaii.
Hawaii, yeah.
And she was like a teenager, and I think she was also saying that she was like, you know, thinking about maybe a guru or something like that, and a flyer like just kind of flew. She like
Wow.
flew into the grass where she was like sitting or something like that. I could be wrong, but I think that was her experience also. And but one question I had was in today's verses when it's discussing the beautiful features of Anantadeva / Sankarsana. I got confused because several verses back when Anantadeva first kind of came onto the scene, it was mentioning his hoods, and so I was picturing, okay, when we first were talking about Anantadeva, okay, we're talking about Anantadeva like Anantadeva, so he has all these hoods. But then some verses later, then it's referring to, it's sounding a lot more like kind of Balaram's features, and it's talking about his toenails also, and then now it's talking about his clothes, but it's no longer, you know, I'm not exactly sure. It seems like I'm supposed to be picturing Anantadeva, but I'm not actually clearly picturing him at all.
Yeah, it's interesting because like some of this description, he sounded very much like Balaram, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in the prayers, in this part that I read with King Chitraketu, like in some of the prayers that King Chitraketu was offering before the Lord, you know, spoke back to him, like, naturally he was, you know, after bowing down, he began to glorify the Lord. And one of the things he mentioned was that all of the universes are situated on all of your hoods, like we were also hearing about the other day. So, yeah, I'll take a very small stab at it, and maybe Druida can enlighten us or someone, but or Balaram. But, like, you know, one thing is that we were reading on Balaram's appearance day, like, about how he expands in these different forms, right? And his personal form is especially assisting in Krishna's pastimes, kind of like his Leela. And then his other expansions are maintaining the spiritual and material worlds. And then as Shesha, he's becoming all of the props, so to speak, you know, for Krishna's pastimes, right? So he has all these different forms, and they're very interconnected, you know. So I was also wondering like that, you know, that occurred to me, you know, in other words, is it just different expansions of himself, or is it like sometimes he's manifesting like this, and then sometimes he kind of comes up like this, or, you know? Do you have any insight on that, Druida Prabhu? Look into Charan's.
Okay.
I didn't catch the question.
Or Balaram?
Do you have something?
Well, just based on what you were saying, what is it like he's manifesting sometimes in one way and sometimes in another way? That just from, you know, reading of the Bhagavatam and other books, of course that's possible. Krishna could do whatever he wants. Like you have the Govardhan pastime, there's something like that going on, lifting of Govardhan Hill. But also it seems that these forms are more, I don't want to say stationary, or more, you know, non-transforming. So it could just be, descriptions of different forms, you know, not that they're transforming.
Right.
Like Anantadeva, he's holding what the universe is and everything, and that seems quite, like it's described, you know, in a particular way.
Right.
But then you start talking about his feet, his lotus feet and his lotus toenails, but anyways, so yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but that probably didn't help anything. But
oh no, it did. You know, they're all in this same tattva. You know what I mean? Like Balaram, Shankarshan, Ananta, Shesha, and in that way, pure devotees understand that. You know, so when they're addressing the Lord, you know, like
I always figured Sankarshan. I mean, it's depicted in Prabhupada's books, BBT, you know, art, which was approved by Srila Prabhupada. There's like Sankarshan, Shiva's meditating on Sankarshan, and he looks a particular way. And then there's pictures of Anantadeva, and he looks a particular way, which is quite different.
right.
I think everybody.
Yeah, that's what was confusing. Here he's saying that Sankarshan, because he's unlimited, he's called unlimited.
Right.
So then it's
But then,
forms also.
but if they're knowing it's the same person, you know what I mean? Like a pure devotee who knows that, like, I'm here with you in this form, but you also have this form, kind of. I mean, I don't know. It just in terms of their offering prayers and things, because they're on a much higher level of cognizance. You know what I mean? I hope that helped. Anything else?
I think he has a question online.
Oh, Vijay, we don't want to not.
You have a question, Vijay Krishna, on Zoom?
Oh my God! I do not have a question because
What?
characteristically the classes given by Vaikuntha Prabhu are in such a way that he usually he says it all. There's no need for questions.
In other words, I put you to sleep, right?
No,
You didn't have time to get a question.
I was very attentively hearing your class because Prabhu, you're just amazing, if I may say it.
Hare Krishna. Grunch Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.